I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson Number 1, Sunday, September 3rd, 2023, the start of the fall quarter. The lesson is entitled, Be Strong and Courageous. Lesson text comes from Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, chapter 11, verses 16 through 19, and verses 21 through 23. Related scriptures are Numbers 27, 15 through 23, Deuteronomy 11, 22 through 25, and 31, 7 through 15, 22 through 23, chapter 34, 5 through 9, and Joshua 22, 1 through 9. The place is Shittim, Canaan, and the time is 1405 BC. People who do not want to do well in life are rare. Few, if any, in this world do not want to lead a comfortable life or at least better themselves. Our first 5 lessons this quarter teach us that as God's people, we can learn from prosperity. True prosperity comes from listening to God's instructions to us and obeying Him. Today's aim, facts. To show how God kept His promises to His people as Joshua and the people obeyed Him. Principle, to demonstrate that God is faithful in keeping His promises. Application, to teach that when we obey God, we will experience His blessings. Illustrating the lesson, we will find God's fullest blessing when we walk by faith, trusting Him to fulfill His promises. Practical points. 1. The ultimate fulfillment of God's plan is never dependent on any man. Joshua 1, 1 through 2. 2. When God makes a promise for your future, you can consider it already done. Verses 3 through 4. 3. We can take courage in God's promise, presence, provision, and protection. Verses 5 through 6. 4. God's promises often include our hard work. Chapter 11, verses 16 through 17. 5. God fulfills His promises in His time and way, verses 18 through 19. 6. Under the authority of God and with His power, no assigned task is too big, verses 21 through 22. 5. God always keeps His promises, verse 23. Golden text. Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses. Joshua 11:23. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is the promise of the land, Joshua 1, 1 through 6. The second is the taking of the land, Joshua 11, 16 through 19. And the third is the completion of the task, Joshua 11, 21 through 23. Introduction. Some of us grew up singing a little chorus that said, every promise in the book is mine, every chapter, every verse, every line. While the melody is catchy and easy to remember many years later, the message is a bit misleading. As children, we did not analyze everything we sang. We just sang for the fun of it. As adults, however, we should pay better attention and realize that many songs and choruses are actually theologically inaccurate. There are promises in the Bible that were for Israel only, for example, and are not for us today. That does not negate the fact that God's word is full of promises for His children today. How sad it is that many believers fail to spend quality time in the Bible and as a result do not benefit from those precious promises. The promise of the land, Joshua 1:1. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Verse 3. Every place that the sole of your foot shall trod upon, that I have given unto you, as I said unto Moses. Verse 4. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even unto the great the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your coast. Verse 5. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. For I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Verse 6. Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land, which I swear unto their fathers to give them. A command, Joshua 1 through 2. Moses was dead. A new era was beginning in the history of Israel. The people were camped on the east side of the Jordan River, having been led there by Moses in their journey toward the land of Canaan. Moses had been told he would not be allowed to lead them into the land, Numbers 20:12, so it was time for a new leader. Moses was known as the servant of the Lord, Joshua 1:1, a title that is repeatedly used for him throughout this book. Joshua 24:29 shows that the title was also used for Joshua by the time of his death. Since Joshua had previously been appointed as Moses' successor, Numbers 27:15 through 23, Deuteronomy 31:14 through 23, he no doubt took the leadership role immediately after Moses' death. He had served as Moses' assistant for many years, so he had been well groomed for the position. Nevertheless, a change of leadership always carries certain uncertainties and adjustments. It was important for Joshua to have God reaffirm him what he was to do. God, who also knows when we need that kind of encouragement, came to Joshua with an important message. We cannot tell exactly how God gave Joshua this message, but when it came, it was clear. The death of the previous leader did not thwart God's plan for his people. Now it was time for the new leader to move ahead with it. Joshua was to lead the people across the Jordan River into the land God was going to give them. This was the land he had promised Abraham, Genesis 12:7. It had been a long time since the promise had been given, but no matter how long it takes, God never goes back on his word to his people. Perhaps Joshua had been waiting expectantly for this message from God and was listening for it. It was very important that as God's people we listen for God's leading. If we seriously want to hear from him, he will never disappoint us. A promise, Joshua 1:3 through 4. What an all-inclusive, powerful word this was. Wherever Joshua was to lead God's people, God would give them that land. We know that much more than simply walking the territory was going to be involved. Times of war and struggle lay ahead for them, but God promised victory. If they would unhesitatingly engage in every conflict with faith in him, they would gain control of the entire land. The land was already determined to be theirs. All they had to do was take it. God had given Abraham detailed boundaries. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great rivers of Euphrates, the Kenites and the Kenzanites and the Perizzites and the Rephaims and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Geshurites and the Jebusites. Genesis 15:18 through 21. To Moses he had said, Turn you and take your journey and go to the mount of the Amorites and go unto the places nigh thereunto, in the plain, in the hills, and in the vale, and in the south, and by the seaside, to the land of the Canaanites, and unto Lebanon, unto the great river, the river Euphrates, Deuteronomy 1:7. From the great wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, and from the Euphrates River on the east to the Mediterranean Sea of the west, all to be theirs. The rule over all this territory was realized in the days of David and Solomon. 1 Kings 4:21, 24 through 25, 1 Chronicles 19:16 through 19, 2 Chronicles 9:23 through 26. But this cannot really compare to the extent of the reign of Jesus, who will rule over all. 1 Corinthians 15:24 through 25. A reassurance. Joshua 1:5 through 6. What more could God say than this? Nobody would be able to successfully resist Joshua's advance and victories. The secret of Moses' success had been the constant presence of God. And now Joshua was being reassured that the Lord would be present with him just as he had been with Moses. God emphatically stated, "I will not fail thee nor forsake thee." Since Joshua had already observed many times how God had sustained Moses, this reassurance would have given him the added incentive he needed to proceed. Kenneth Gangle, in the Holman Old Testament commentary, Joshua likened what Joshua faced at the river to difficulties we sometimes face. He made this observation and analogy. When we stare at the Jordan River in our lives, what do we see? The sprawling, muddy waters of spiritual failures, sins, fears, and habits. Some persistent physical problem. The steady flow of broken relationships. Like Joshua, we need to take our eyes off the river and fix them on the God of the river. No problem is insurmountable for God. In this message, God told Joshua 4 times that he should be strong and courageous. Verses 6 through 7, 9, and 18. The result would be successful, conquering and dividing all the land among Israel's tribes. Joshua would have to exhibit this characteristic because the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. Before everything was done, 7 years would pass. The only requirement for him was strength and courage, which he would find in placing his complete trust in the Lord. The battles were going to be God's, not his. Just as God promised to never fail or forsake Joshua, so he will always be with us. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Psalms 46:1. Is anything excluded from this statement? Gangle mentioned spiritual failures, sins, habits, persistent physical problems, and broken relationships. Often we are in the middle of such circumstances. We are tempted to wonder where God is and whether he cares. The answer is that he is a very present help. He is not far away, but very close by. The taking of the land, Joshua 11:16. So Joshua took all that land, the hills and all the south country, and all the land of Goshen, and the valley and the plain, and the mountain of Israel, and the valley of the same, verse 17. Even from the Mount Halak that goeth up to Sarai, even unto Baalgad in the valley of Lebanon, under Mount Hermon, and all their kings he took and smote them and slew them, verse 18. Joshua made war all a long time with all those kings, verse 19. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon, and all they took in battle. All other they took in battle. The land Joshua took, Joshua 11:16 through 17. The conquering of the land of Canaan was accomplished through 3 major campaigns. The initial one occurred in central Canaan and included the taking of Jericho and Ai, after which the inhabitants of Gibeon, through deceit, secured a covenant agreement with Israel. When word of this covenant agreement got out, several kings from the southern part of Canaan banded together to punish Gibeon. This obligated Joshua to come to Gibeon's rescue, which was followed by an extended campaign in the south, chapter 10. When word of all this success reached the northern cities, they formed a huge alliance, 11:1 through 5. But God told Joshua not to be afraid. He was to take the initiative by attacking those allied forces and watch God deliver them all into his hands, verse 6. Thus the northern campaign was accomplished quickly, and the city that led the alliance was burned to the ground, verses 11 through 13. This completed the fulfillment of everything God had commanded Moses, who in turn had passed the command on to Joshua, verse 15. Verse 16 summarizes by simply stating, so Joshua took all that land, and follows this with details. Most of the areas mentioned were in the central and southern regions, but Gilgad, verse 17, is specified as being in the valley of Lebanon under Mount Hermon. This was the far north. The intention of this detailed listing of conquered cities is to confirm that the entire land was taken by Joshua and his army. As God has promised, every place he set his foot he was able to conquer. 1:3. To further emphasize the completeness of Joshua's victory, it is stated that every king was captured, struck down, and slain. Every city was considered to be a separate entity, each with its own king. This explains why there were so many kings in the land. The battles Joshua fought, Joshua 11:18 through 19. Two facts are given in these verses. First, this war took a long time. The long time of verse 18 is about 7 years. Israel's failure at Kadesh Barnea, Deuteronomy 2:14, at which time Caleb was 40 years old, Joshua 14:7. To their crossing of the Jordan was 38 years. He was 85 when the conquest was over, verse 10, which means that at least 7 years had been devoted to the campaign. The second fact is that there was one exception to the conquering of all the cities, namely Gibeon. In Joshua 9, we read how many men from Gibeon came to Joshua pretending to be from a city far away. They carried out an elaborate deception in order to save their lives from destruction. The leaders of Israel, who neglected to seek God's advice about the matter, verse 14, fell for the ploy and made a costly treaty with them. Because of this treaty, the Israelites could not destroy the Gibeonites, and the children of Israel smote them not, because the princes of the congregation had sworn unto them by the Lord God of Israel. And all the congregation murmured against the princes, but all the princes said unto the congregation, we have sworn unto them by the Lord God of Israel. Now therefore we may not touch them, verses 18 through 19. When God's people fail to consult and follow him, they must live with the consequences. Many readers struggle with the idea that God would command such violence against people. An examination of the evils prevalent in Canaan, which are found in several passages in the Bible, helps us understand that this was a matter of justice on God's part. The sins of the Canaanites included incest, adultery, child sacrifice, homosexuality, and bestiality. Leviticus 18:1 through 25. God's mercy for them had reached its limit, and he used Israel to accomplish his judgment on them. The completion of the task, verse 21. And at that time came Joshua and cut off the Anakims from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, and from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. Verse 22. There was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained. Verse 23. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. Destroying the Anakims, Joshua 11:21 through 22. When Moses sent the 12 spies into Canaan from Kadesh Barnea, they came back with a mixed review. He had told them to check out the people, the land, and the cities, Numbers 13:18 through 19. They found the land productive, the cities large and fortified, and the people strong, verses 27 through 29. But what dominated their thinking was the presence of the descendants of Anak, verses 28 and 33. For they were giants and made the spies feel as small as grasshoppers. The Anakim conquered by Joshua were those giants who had once seemed so invisible. invincible. The book of Judges makes it very clear that Israel was unsuccessful in driving all the Canaanites out of the land, while Joshua 14:12 through 14 says that Caleb asked for the city of Hebron and later drove out the Anakim dwelling there. 15:13 through 14. Some of the Anakim remained in other places. The cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod are named as the places where they continued to dwell. 11:22. These cities would become 3 of the 5 major cities of the Philistines. David would eventually face the giant Goliath, who was from the city of Gath. 1 Samuel 17. When God's people follow him obediently, the size of the problem makes no difference. Fulfilling God's promises, Joshua 11:23. The last sentence reads almost like a sigh of relief. Finally, there was some peace. This had been God's goal for Israel all along. There was still much to do. Joshua 13 begins by stating that there was still much land to take. All over the land, however, were established points of control from which the Israelites could work and secure their inheritance. God was indeed fulfilling his promises to them. Questions. 1. What title used of Moses was later used also of Joshua? 2. What did the death of previous leader do to God's plan for his people? 3. What promise did God give Joshua prior to his entering Canaan? 4. How did God reassure Joshua that these victories would occur? 5. What was the final phrase of war for Israel in conquering Canaan? 6. Why were there so many kings for Joshua to conquer? 7. How long did it take for Israel to conquer Canaan, and how do we know that? 8. What one city was not conquered, and why was it left alone? 9. Why was it so important to know that Joshua conquered the Anakim? 10. Since God fulfilled his promises, did Israel fully control the land? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, September 3rd, 2023. Thank you for listening. God bless.